Jay Shear.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear,
business consultant.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear Business Consulting.
Welcome. I'm Jay Shear with Jay Shear Business Consulting. We build solid foundations for service-based businesses to grow and scale and achieve the results and success they deserve. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Bruce Lee said, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." Being disciplined and mastering the fundamentals is what separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. Well, in today's episode, we delve into the world of high performance and what it takes to raise your game in business and life. Our guest is a father of three, a keynote and TEDx speaker, author, performance expert, and podcaster. He spent 15 years working with some of the highest performing athletes on the planet, including NBA superstars Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Kobe Bryant. Today, he teaches individuals and organizations the same proven principles and strategies that elite athletes use to perform at a world-class level. His roster of clients includes American Express, Pepsi, Starbucks, and UGG, to name just a few. Please welcome the man who is fired up and preparing to earn the Spartan Super 10K medal, Alan Stein Jr. Alan, thank you so much for joining us on Business Minds Coffee Chat.
Oh my goodness, Jay, I've been looking forward to this since we put it on the calendar, my friend, and it's lovely to be with you, and I'm excited for a fun conversation.
Well, I'm really excited. So let's jump right in. I think a really good starting point for us would be for you to take us back to really where your story begins. And what I'd like you to focus on, if you could, are some of the early experiences that you had that shape who you are today.
I think the best starting point is when I was 5 years old and my parents signed me up for my first recreation basketball league, my first experience with the game of basketball, and I fell in love immediately. And here 40 years later, I mean, literally 4 decades later to this day, basketball is still a major pillar in my life. And I say that with a tremendous amount of appreciation and gratefulness that I've been able to make a living and build a life around something I was really passionate about. And I remember around middle school, a coach gave me arguably the best advice I've ever received, which is you should always find something you're really good at and find something you love to do, and then find where those two things intersect. And that point of intersection will be your strength zone. And the more time you can invest in your strength zone, not only will you perform at a higher level, but you'll actually have higher levels of happiness and fulfillment as well. And, you know, the fact that I've been able to live in my strength zone for the vast majority of my life is something I'm very thankful for. And I also think it's important to note that that exact point of intersection has changed a few times over the course of my life. You know, for the vast majority of my younger life, that point of intersection was as a basketball player. Well, once I decided, once it was time for me to stop playing basketball after college, then that point of intersection moved to being a basketball performance coach. And then I decided to make a recent pivot 4 years ago to go into corporate keynote speaking and share all of the lessons and strategies and mindsets that I had learned from the game. So I'm still very much in the epicenter of my strength zone, but the actual strength zone has moved throughout the years as I've matured and gotten some life experience.
And that makes perfect sense because everything's always in a state of change. And we hope that as we move through life, that we are acquiring more knowledge, more experience, more wisdom, which helps us to move in the direction that we want to go and experience more of the juice of life, if you will. So I want to stay back in your youth for just a couple of moments or two, because I want to unpack a couple of things. I would love to find out from you during those early years, what was your mindset like? How were you processing information? How were you showing up for the game? Where did you really learn about the value of not only your skills, right, but also being a team player, all of those sorts of things that are so important for those that participate in sports. So what was that like for you, and who did you learn the most from?
Well, I'm incredibly thankful that I had two very loving and supporting parents who also happened to be elementary educators. My mom was a first grade teacher for 30 years, and my father started as a teacher and then became a principal at the middle school level for 30 years before they retired. So my parents, and then I had a variety of other coaches and mentors and people that really poured into me at those younger ages when I was incredibly impressionable. And thankfully, they all had some really good values, to impart upon me. And I remember, well, they didn't spell them out with the specificity that I'm about to share with you. I remember them emphasizing things like, be a good listener and be open to your coaches, be a good teammate, always try to help somebody else out. Give your best effort whenever you're going to do something. And they always place an emphasis on having fun. And the reason that's so cool to me is now, fast forward to, I'm the parent of young children who are all playing sports and doing some different activities. And those are really the four, pillars that I reinforce with them on a daily basis. I tell them that I will always love you unconditionally, and I will always support your pursuit of finding your strength zone. But in order to do that, you need to be able to do four things every single practice, every training session, every game. And that is to be coachable, to be a great teammate, to give a great effort, and to have fun. And I said, as long as you're doing those four things, I'll happily support all of your endeavors. As soon as you're not doing those four things, then collectively we're going to pivot into something else that will allow you to do those. So I'm so thankful that I had people pouring into me at the right time and pouring in the right information. But with all of that said, there was still a conflict between, and I still see this conflict to this day, a conflict between praising effort and praising the controllables and praising the process versus the outcome. And as I look back on my childhood, that was one of the biggest conflicts I had. I understood how important the process was, but I learned very quickly that everyone was paying attention to the results, whether that was, what you scored on a test in academics, or did you win or lose the game, or how many points did you score? So part of my problem was I tied my identity and my self-worth into outcomes. And that is a very slippery slope, as I'm sure you can appreciate. So
Absolutely.
Basically, when you're scoring well on tests and you're winning games, you feel good about yourself. When you're not doing those things, then you don't feel good about yourself. And I didn't want to be on that roller coaster anymore. I found that very disempowering, that I was basically putting my own happiness, fulfillment, and self-worth into the hands of outcomes that I didn't have full control over. So needless to say, 40 years of life experience has gotten me to unlearn and relearn that. And I've now taken the power back. And while I certainly enjoy getting outcomes that I'd prefer, they don't define who I am, that I put all of my heart and soul into the process, into the journey, and into doing the work. And that's probably one of the biggest differences between the teenage Alan Stein Jr. and now the mid-40s Alan Stein Jr.
Well, that's very powerfully said. So I'm curious, as you were talking through that, and I'm listening to your words, and I'm feeling you in my heart, because I've been there before as well, and I continue to evolve, right? I may not have been on the court, but have experienced very similar feelings, similar emotions. And I look back at my own career as an example, so many times where I was highly focused on the outcome, although I understood the process, like you said. But, as soon as we define ourselves based on that outcome, I think you said it best, it's a slippery slope. And that's a very, very difficult situation to deal with. And in my case, there was so much ego involved, and I really have had to learn how to get out of my own way. So from your perspective, it sounds like, obviously you've come a long way. What was the pivotal point where things began to change, where you began to realize that in order for me to grow into the person that I know I can become, I have to look at things differently and process things differently and just become better?
The biggest moment was when I went through a divorce 6 years ago. And as part of that process was going in for some couples counseling and went in to see a therapist, a psychologist, a counselor, which initially was focused on, either repairing the marriage or figuring out that we'd be better off apart, which is certainly what we figured out. And I'm very proud to say I've had one of the most amicable divorces in the history of divorce. My ex-wife and I are good friends, and we make great co-parents to our 3 children. But that process started the wheels turning for some serious introspection and reflection and self-work. And once we had kind of wrapped up the couples counseling, I continued to go see this therapist once a week for almost 2 years and started doing some real personal work, some real deep work. And part of that was taking a look at every behavior that I had, every belief that I had, all of my experiences as a child, both the good, bad, and everything in between. And I really started to figure out which of these patterns were serving me well and which of these patterns were really undermining my happiness, undermining my ability to evolve and to grow. And one of the biggest ones that came up was this concept of being attached to outcomes, that me aligning my self-worth with my achievement was one of the biggest ones, biggest revelations that I had, and really started this process. And there were several more. I mean, every belief that I had held so tightly onto for the first 40 years of life, I started to loosely let go and ask myself, why do I believe this? Look at some of my behavior patterns, both the ones that were helpful and the ones that were not, and ask myself, why am I doing these things? Why do I believe what I believe? And why have I been behaving the way I've been behaving? And let me see if I can start to find a better path. And this concept of detaching from outcomes and focusing more on the process, detaching, from my happiness and fulfillment, my perspective, my outlook, my attitude, detaching all of that from circumstances and events and what people say and what people do, I found to be incredibly liberating and powerful. Now I'm the one that has the keys to the car. And now with that said, I'm an emotional being. I have a large palette of emotions. I'm not a robot. I still feel all of the emotions that I used to feel, but I don't let them dictate my decision-making, and I don't let them dictate how I'm feeling. If I'm feeling frustrated, I give myself permission to feel frustrated. I don't compound that with feelings of guilt or shame or make myself feel even worse for it. I just say, this is how I'm feeling, and pretty soon I won't be. So, I've improved my emotional agility considerably, but it all started with going in to see that therapist because of my divorce.
Yeah, what an amazing process to go through. And I know that takes courage, and it takes a tremendous amount of stamina and wherewithal to be able to power through that and recognize the fact that, look, there are some areas that I know I can improve upon, because I don't like the way that I'm showing up today. And for you to be able to spend the time and make the investment to go through that exploratory process to learn more about you, to learn more about the past stories you were telling yourself, the biases, the way that you were processing information, and kind of retool all of that and rewire, to use the word that you used. I'm curious, for those that today may be stuck in their situation, could be stuck professionally, could be stuck personally, in whatever it is they're doing. Let's just take a work situation, right? Maybe they're in a particular job or career that they just don't feel like they're moving ahead, or maybe they don't feel comfortable with what they're doing, and they're looking to move past that. What were some of the tools that you learned during that discovery process that you could share with our listeners that may help them as well? There may have even been some exercises that you went through.
The first thing, and it took me, it's awesome that we're having this conversation and that I can succinctly summarize, several years worth of a journey, into a couple of minutes. But I'm glad that you highlighted the fact that it really was a long and arduous process. Many of those sessions were emotionally exhausted. I would leave a 1-hour therapy session and I was every bit as exhausted as if I had just got done playing basketball for an hour. And it took a tremendous amount of work. But one of the biggest points, and it took me a little while to get to this was to have an attitude of extreme ownership and complete self-accountability and responsibility. Acknowledge that the vast majority of the things that have gone on in the world and will go on in the world are well outside of my control, but I always control my response to those things. And, back even looking at myself as a young athlete in my teenage years, I was the king of making excuses, blaming others, and complaining. And over time, as I'm starting to unpack these things, I realized that trilogy of behaviors was not serving me well. That anytime I'd blame, complain, or make an excuse on why anything didn't go my way, why I didn't get a score on a test, why I didn't play very well in a basketball game, whatever it may be, why a relationship didn't work out, I was always putting the responsibility on somebody else or on something else. And my therapist really held me to the fire and basically said, you need to have an attitude of extreme ownership and responsibility and accountability. And that's been one of the biggest tools to help. And the reason I say that, if someone is feeling stuck right now, let's just say feeling stuck vocationally in their work, the very first thing they have to acknowledge is they've made a series of decisions that have allowed them to get to this point, that they've accepted a certain level from a variety of different places. They've accepted that they're being stuck. The longer they say, well, I'm stuck because my boss doesn't want me to continue to matriculate up in this company, or complain about the office environment, as long as they're going to be pushing stuff outwards and deflecting responsibility, they'll most likely continue to stay stuck. So the very first step is having the awareness to acknowledge you are stuck, but then being able to say, all right, getting unstuck is 100% my responsibility. And yes, there may be some things that make that more challenging. I'm not arguing the fact that you might have a toxic culture at work, or that you might have a boss that's not a great communicator. Those things may be true, but they're completely irrelevant. There's no reason to double down on those. Instead, say, all right, what do I need to do to get unstuck? And to me, that's the very first step. And the beautiful part is that first step is usually the most challenging. Once you get that first step going, then you get the next step and you can start to create some momentum. So anyone listening, if you are stuck right now, please know I have a tremendous amount of empathy and compassion for you, but that you have the power to get yourself unstuck. And you have to accept that you were the one that got yourself stuck in the first place.
I love that. That's not easy to hear. And I get it, right? I understand those that have their earbuds in right now that are listening to this conversation, or, some of them are probably saying, oh, he doesn't get me, right? He doesn't know my situation, because it's very, very difficult to hold that mirror up in front of ourselves and realize that instead of all the fingers pointing in every other direction, it should be coming to me. Right? Everything is my fault. I need to take ownership. And, we accept so many things that happen, but for whatever reason, we choose not to take a look at it and realize that I have that power. I'm in the place where I am today because of the decisions and the choices that I made. So thank you so much for bringing that out, because it's an important conversation to have. And I think to really highlight what you said, it is really that first step, because, and I know you talk about this in your book, which we're going to dig into, Raise Your Game. And that's around self-awareness, right? Because we have, such a powerful tool to learn. We have to understand that self-awareness to be able to start to move forward, because otherwise we have no path, right? We have nothing to work from, right? And so speak to the self-awareness piece for a moment, and let's jump into Raise Your Game, because that is really the first piece of raising your game. Why don't you speak to that?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you went in this direction. And the reason, going back for a moment to the folks that are feeling stuck, the reason I have so much empathy and compassion for them is, I've experienced that as well. Let's just use, for example, I was very stuck in an unhappy marriage. And this is why my therapist has been one of the most pivotal people in my life. Most of those initial sessions were me blaming, complaining, and making excuses for everything that was going on in my life. And she was the one that kept holding that mirror up to my face and making sure that I took full responsibility and accountability. Anytime I would start to make an excuse or blame someone else or just have a good old fashioned venting and complaining session, she'd basically say, okay, are you done now? Okay, now that you're done with that, let's go ahead and do something that's going to move you forward. I mean, many of those initial couples therapy sessions, I spent all of my time saying, well, if my wife would do this, or if she would do this, then things would be better. And she just kept saying, well, you have no control over what she does. Why don't we focus on what you're doing? And please know that anytime there's a dysfunction in a relationship, it's never, 100% on one person. And it's not always 50-50 per se, but she said, Alan, you are bringing things to the table that are causing this relationship to be unhealthy as well. It's not just the other person. And I find that fascinating because same thing, if someone's feeling stuck at business or in their work, they probably feel like, well, if my boss would do this differently and my coworkers would do this differently, then everything would be fine. And that is very rarely the case. We have to take complete ownership over what it is that we're bringing. And we should only focus on the things we have control over. I mean, it's futile to try and get someone else to behave differently. They're the ones that have to make that change. So that's why I say this with tremendous empathy and compassion in my heart, that whether you're stuck at work or you're stuck in a relationship or you're stuck in any other area of life, that hardest hurdle is the acknowledgement of it. And that takes humility. It takes vulnerability. And it is not something that happened for me in the snap of a finger. I mean, we went for weeks and months of me, going through that before I would finally evolve to the next level. And ultimately it does come down to what you just teed up perfectly, which is self-awareness. It's the first chapter in my book for a reason. I'm a big believer that it's the foundation to which the rest of the house is built, that you have to have a very high sense of self-awareness before you can look to improve any area of your life. I know the analogy of a GPS is becoming somewhat overused and cliche, but there's a reason for that. There's so much truth to it. There's only two coordinates that a GPS needs to know, only two. It needs to know where you are in this moment. So it doesn't need to know where you were 5 months ago, 5 weeks ago, 5 days ago, or even 5 minutes ago. A GPS needs to know where are you right now in this moment and where is it that you're trying to go. Those are the only two coordinates that matter. And I laugh and say with a smile, because in life, those might be the two most important coordinates we need to know. We need to have the self-awareness to know where we are right now at present, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And we also have to have the vision of where it is that we're trying to go or who it is that we're trying to become. And those are really important details, but it all starts with that self-awareness. And self-awareness is a combination of knowing, I'll call it the good stuff. And I'm intentionally saying that in air quotes because I don't believe it is good or bad. I'm only using that for reference for your listeners. But the good stuff is the things that we do well, the things that we enjoy, our goals, our hopes, our dreams, our strengths. That tends to be the stuff people love to focus on, understandably. But there's always another side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is, what are my weaknesses, my flaws, my imperfections, my deficiencies? Where are my biggest opportunities for growth? What are my biggest insecurities and fears? And that stuff is what most people consider the bad stuff. Although I tend to look at it all as being completely neutral and sterile. All of that stuff makes up who you are. But you need to be willing to look on both sides. And that's what therapy was able to do for me, was it got me to stare at that second side of the coin and stare at the things that were really holding me back and undermining me. But one thing to heighten self-awareness is to make sure that your evaluation of how you see yourself is accurate. And it's very similar to how the rest of the world sees you. The best example I can think of, and this is because it's a real life example to me, was if you would have asked me 10 years ago, Jay, if I thought I was a good listener, I would have said, yes, absolutely. I'm a great listener. But if you would have asked the people that knew me the best, they'd say, oh no, Alan's not a very good listener. He's waiting for you to finish talking so that he can say what he wants to say. And there were a variety of things that really impeded my ability to be an empathetic listener. But at the time, I thought I was a great listener. Well, that just shows I had a severe lack of self-awareness. I thought I was a good listener The rest of the world disagreed. So there was a gap. It's kind of funny because if 10 years ago, had I had more awareness, if you would have asked me if I was a good listener, and I would have said, Jay, you know what? It's really not one of my strong suits. It's something that I'm aware of and I really need to improve and get better at. That would have actually shown a much higher sense of self-awareness. I'm not a very good listener, and the rest of the world agrees I'm not a good listener, but at least there's alignment. And when there's that alignment, that's when you can start to make an improvement in something. You're never going to improve something that you're unaware of. You're never going to get better at something that you're oblivious to. These things take intention. So the key is this is not about being good at everything. This is not about being perfect. This is simply about a accurate evaluation of the things you do well and your biggest opportunities for growth. And once you have that foundation, now you've got the starting point for the GPS, and you can, set the GPS coordinates for where you're trying to go.
Incredible. And so very applicable and true. I mean, this is definitely a truth when it comes to that self-awareness piece. So you gave a great example, and you also gave a tool that can be used there. So let's go back to someone who thinks that they're a great listener or that they're really good in a certain area of business, but they want to find out if that in fact is true, or is that just a story that I'm telling myself? What is the best way for someone to get that kind of feedback?
It's kind of funny that the way to improve self-awareness is by actually asking some other people. And that is not asking, a Facebook acquaintance or a random person off the street, but it's entrusting the people that are closest to you and that know you the best. This could certainly be your spouse. If you have adult children, other family members or friends or neighbors or members of the community. If you work closely with someone at work, I would certainly recommend asking them. And the first thing is creating a safe environment where you say, look, I'm giving you permission to tell me what I need to hear. I want you to tell me the truth as you see it. This is not me trying to solicit, some affection or some adoration or appreciation. I'm not here to have you blow smoke or tell me what you think I want to hear. What I really need is the truth. And there are a few areas in my life that I would love to hear your evaluation of me. And again, the more honest you can be with me, the more I will appreciate that and let them know. And I really do believe this, that honesty is a form of caring. It's a form of love. That if you really love someone and care about them, either professionally or personally, you'll tell them the truth. And as you said earlier so correctly, the truth is not always easy to hear. It's not always what we want to hear, but if it's what we need to hear, then that's really important. And I've always believed that a great friend, a great coach, a great teacher, a great boss, a great colleague, they're going to tell you the things that you need to hear. So you start it by saying, I'm giving you full permission to tell me the truth as you see it. And then basically, you figure out what it is that you want to ask them. I feel like my inability to actively listen is undermining the relationships I'm having in my life. I would love for you to let me know, how do you view me as a listener? Are you often frustrated when we have conversations because you don't think I'm present or you don't think I'm actively listening? And try to get these people, to almost grade you, if you will, give you a report card in some of these areas. And then you just need to see if the way that they grade you is very similar to how you grade yourself. And it's not, it doesn't have to be as formal as, a 1 to 10 rating system. And, I give myself a 7 on listening and Jay gives me an 8 on listening. It doesn't have to be that formal unless you want it to be, but we just want to start to look for patterns. And the pattern is, if most of the people close to me don't rate me very high as a listener, then I'm probably not a very good listener. It doesn't matter what I think about myself. And this is where the blaming and complaining and making excuses can come in, because it's very easy to deflect and just say, well, all these people don't know what they're talking about. Trust me, I'm a great listener. Well, that's the problem in the first place, is your inability to see, how you behave clearly. So if you can recruit people that love you and care enough about you to help you on this journey of evolution, that's where it really starts. And for me, it started initially just with this singular therapist, basically giving me the straight dope and saying, I'll tell you right now, Alan, you're not a very good listener. And that was such a shock to my system that's when I went out and started asking a couple other people, and they were like, yeah, Alan, you're a good guy. You've got a good heart. We know you mean well, but no, you're not a very good listener. And I mean, you want to talk about some humble pie. I've eaten plenty pieces of it, my man, over these last few years, but it's what allowed me to kind of get over that hump. And while I don't believe I'm a world-class listener at present, I'm very proud of the fact that I have made some improvements in that area, and that consistently I'm a more attentive listener now than I was 6 years ago. Still a work in progress, still going to get better, but I'm moving in the right direction. And to me, that's what's most important.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. So then let's talk about what happens. What's the next step when we get the feedback? So I hate to throw a softball, but I'm going to anyway. So somebody's received that feedback that they're not a very good listener. They're not a very good coach. Maybe they're not as strong in developing relationships and rapport as they thought they were. What next? What do I do with that information?
Well, the very first thing you do is you show some gratitude for the person that cared enough about you to share you that. Don't gloss over that. Let them know that, hey, Jay, I know that was really hard for you to tell me that. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate it, man, that couldn't have been easy looking me eye to eye, shoulder to shoulder, and telling me a few things that I'm not very good at. So as a friend, I want to thank you, because remember, this is an evergreen process. You're going to most likely need to go back to that person again at some point and have them expose some other blind spots that you have. Could be a month later, could be a year later, could be a decade later, but just let them know how much you appreciate that, and really internalize it as, in this example, Jay cares so much about me that he's willing to say something that was probably really hard for him to say, and something he knew was really hard for me to hear. Man, am I thankful to have someone in my life that has my back like that. Like, I don't want to gloss over that. And I want to get to the point where people are asking me to help expose their blind spots. They entrust me so much, and they know that I care about them, that I can pay that forward. So the very first step is to acknowledge it and appreciate what they did. And then the second step is, again, as you said so perfectly, holding that mirror up as close to your own face as you can and say, okay, what are the ways I'm responsible for this behavior? So I'm not going to come up with a reason on why Jay thinks I'm a poor listener. I need to look at myself in the mirror and ask, why am I a poor listener? What are some of the behavior patterns or beliefs that are causing me to not be the listener that I'm capable of? And I'm so glad we're using listening as an example, because I think it's a skill set that applies to most people. And it's an area that most of us can continue to improve if we want to heighten our relationships, whether intimate relationships or professional relationships. But the key is saying, okay, I need to take ownership. I'm going to agree and concede that I'm not a good listener. Now let me start to unpack why. Why do I feel the need to always one-up somebody when they're telling me something? Why am I tuning out what they're saying and formulating my response before I've even heard, what their point is? But why do I enter most relationships in kind of an adversarial, it's me versus you, and I'm going to win this talk? Why am I doing these things? And then slowly start to unpack it. Because once again, as I said before, we're not going to improve something that we're unaware of. So let's now be aware of some of our previous behaviors and patterns, and let's figure out some ways we can slowly course correct. And then the third part, which is really important, is give yourself some grace. Don't beat yourself up over this. Don't look so far in the rearview mirror and say, man, I've spent 40 years of my life as a poor listener. Look at all the things that would be different. You know what? It's done. It's in the past. There's no reason to dwell on that. Just give yourself some grace and say, you know what? I am a flawed, imperfect human being. I'm thankful to have people in my life that have helped expose these things. I'm going to hold myself fully accountable to them. And now from this day forward, I'm going to make incremental progress and get better in these things. And when you get to that point, now you can just, you continue to grow and you continue to evolve and improve. And that to me is one of the most liberating feelings you can have.
Love it. So fantastic and so powerful. So I want to go back to raise your game for a moment. So you've had a history of working with some of the most elite athletes, the most elite basketball players that we know of. And Obviously, you have brought a tremendous amount of your own experience and knowledge in helping others perform at the highest levels. So we talked about self-awareness. Walk us through some of the other areas that would allow our listeners to be able to raise their game, some things that they should be focused on, and maybe some actionable steps that they can take. Obviously, we don't have time to go into every detail, but maybe a few, pick off 3 or 4 that you think would be relevant and would resonate with our entrepreneurial and business-minded audience.
Sure. There's a handful of key principles that I believe they're the epicenter of the book, but they're applicable to every single area of our life. The first is the lesson I learned firsthand from the late, great Kobe Bryant, the first time I saw him work out. And that is the best never get bored with the basics. So whatever area of your life you're trying to improve, you need to focus on the fundamentals and you need to embrace the basics. In a game like basketball, that's your shooting mechanics, that's your footwork. Well, a guy like Kobe Bryant would incessantly work on those things for hours every single day because he knew that if he could master the basics, going back to that analogy of a foundation, he's building a stronger foundation, for everything else that will be built upon that. Same thing, if your goal is to improve your marriage, go back to the basics. What are the basic building blocks of a healthy, intimate relationship? I mean, I know folks could rattle those off easily. One of them is what we've been talking about for 25 minutes, which is the ability to listen, the ability to be in the present moment, being compassionate, being a safe space where your partner feels supported. Learn to speak their love language and make sure that they feel loved and appreciated. We all know these things, but it doesn't mean we do them. And that's also what I say in the book is what's called a performance gap. And it's the gap between what we know and what we do. So any area, whether if it's not an intimate relationship at work, I want to be up for that next promotion. Well, what are the basic building blocks that allow you to, within your role, make a maximum contribution to your organization? I promise you, anyone listening to this can go and figure out 3 or 4 things that if I do these 3 or 4 things really, really well, then I'll be making a maximum contribution to the team. And they'll certainly consider me for a promotion. And that's really all we need to do. So any area of life, refocus the lens on the basic building blocks and the fundamentals that will allow you to be, perform at an excellent level in any of those things. Another one that's really important is learning how to blend confidence and humility. No matter how high I'm performing, I don't know everything, and there's still more that I can learn. You want to blend that humility with a confidence that says, hey, I've put in the work during the unseen hours. I've gotten in some purposeful reps. I deserve the right to be happy and deserve the right to be a high performer and successful. And you want to marry those two things together, because if you're all humility and no confidence, you'll be rather meek and timid. If you're all confidence with no humility, you'll be borderline narcissistic and arrogant. And that's a major turnoff to most people. So you really want to blend those 2 things together. And those are 2 just off the top of my head that I think apply to so many different areas of our life. But I tell you what, if every person listening to this can improve their self-awareness, can refocus the lens on the basics and the fundamentals in those areas, and can learn how to balance humility and confidence, you do those 3 things, and I'm telling you, you'll get unstuck for sure.
Isn't that the truth? So good. And obviously, we're going to link to the book in the show notes because it goes into a lot of detail and it goes deep into the areas that we can all look at to improve upon. And it's a great, basically it's a toolkit to be able to raise our game, right? So once we have the tools and we're able to identify the areas that we need to grow and that we need to improve upon, now that we've got the right tools in hand and we're willing to be disciplined about it and do the work, we can start to see better results and improve ourselves overall. So it's an excellent book, and we'll definitely link to that. I wanted to see if you could speak to the role of neurochemicals in high performance. So when I think about high performers and I think about sports, when I think about high performers in any area of life and business, I start to think about flow states and dopamine and, all these other things that are going on. So Speak to the neurochemical side for a moment. How important a role do they play? And also if you can touch on flow states and how important that is when it comes to being a high performer.
Ultimately, the epicenter of everything you just said is going to be our mindset and the perspective at which we view the world around us. And that's arguably the biggest separator between high performers and those that aren't quite at that level yet. It's all what's between the ears. And certainly if we're going to talk about sport and professional athletes, yes, there is a physical component. Certainly to play in the NBA, it helps if you're 6'8", 240, and explosive with minimal body fat. There's no question. But outside of the professional athletics realm, for the rest of us, that's not, much of a barrier to entry. Like it doesn't matter. Now, I'm a big believer that it's in everyone's best interest to work to a certain level of physical fitness, because I do believe it's completely intertwined and you can't detach it from mental fitness and emotional fitness and spiritual fitness. I look at the human being in a very holistic way, but you can be a thriving CEO and be 5'6", 140 pounds and not have a great vertical jump. So we don't have to worry so much about the physical, but we do have to pay attention to the mind and the mind and its relationship to the emotions that we feel. What I was talking about earlier, that's all connected to the chemicals that flood our body. If you're able to maintain a high level of composure and have a high level of confidence, and you can manage stress effectively, and you can avoid stagnation and avoid burnout and things like that, then you're going to flood your body with more of the chemicals like dopamine and things that actually move you in the direction that you're trying to go, as opposed to someone that is constantly in this fight or flight, predicament, somebody that's, just constantly living in fear, constantly under stress. And these things take practice. The ability to manage stress is one of the most important skill sets we can have. And that, again, going back to the athletic world, is why you can see somebody like a Stephen Curry or a Kevin Durant step up to the free throw line when the game's tied and there's 2 seconds left, and they're cool as a cucumber, and that's taken a tremendous amount of mental preparation and mental skills and mental conditioning, but they've gotten themselves to that point. And a lot of this stems back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation about getting off the roller coaster of letting the outer world determine your inner world. That if everything that goes on in the world and everything people say and do determines how you feel about yourself and what your perspective is and your level of optimism and your attitude, you'll never have any type of consistency. So we need to be able to work on our mindset, develop what we'd call a winner's mindset, to make sure that we're much more consistent in how we perform. And one of the things is it can often, to some level, kind of chop off the highs and lows. Many of the high performers I've been around, they don't ever let themselves get too high. They win a championship. And a perfect example at the time of this recording is Giannis, who just won a championship with the Milwaukee Bucks, and they're asking him, is he satisfied with that? And he said, no, absolutely not. I'm thankful to have won. It felt great to win, but I'm starting to work towards next year already. So it kind of chops off the highs, but it also chops off the lows. You experience a devastating loss, and it doesn't take you out of the game completely. You're able to kind of move to that next play. And I think having those guardrails up is really an important part of being able to progress forward.
Absolutely. So let's share some of those guardrails that you put up, some of the things that you do to be able to manage stress, to be able to manage self-talk, some of the things that go on in our daily lives that give you greater perspective, let's say.
Well, the first, I kind of just teed it up there, is this mindset of next play. That no matter what just happened, I'm going to refocus the lens on the next play. Once something is in my rearview mirror, I try not to be too concerned with it. Now, if there's a lesson to be learned from it, I absolutely want to reap that. But if, let's just say I just got off stage from giving a keynote talk to a group of 100 sales professionals. No matter how that went, if in my mind that was the best talk I've ever given or the worst talk I've ever given, I need to be able to refocus the lens and move right on to the next thing that's going on in my day, or the next speaking engagement, if you will. I can't get too caught up in what happened. So same thing with a basketball player. You turn the ball over. All right, that's over. Next play. You missed a wide open shot. All right, I know it's not your preference. We would have preferred that you made it, but you didn't. So next play. Oh, the referee missed a call? Yeah, it happens. Next play. The sooner you can move to the next play will prevent you from hanging around too high or getting too low. Another thing that you had teed up earlier, which is a major foundational belief, is putting your focus on the two things we have control over, our effort and our attitude. So control the controllables. Don't focus on everything else. Don't focus on the outcomes because we don't control that. Let's focus on what we do have control over, and that is the attitude and effort to which we show up with. And then the last one, which kind of pieces these all together and also piggybacks on what we were talking about earlier, which is be more focused on the process, just in general. Don't worry about, whether or not the ball goes in or whether or not you win the game. Focus on the process that will increase the chance that you'll get the types of outcomes that you want. So if you focus on the process, then it's easier to live with the really high highs and the really low lows because you know that they're just outcomes and you don't have control over those. So for me, this shift into being much more process focused, much more focused on my own attitude and effort, and no matter what goes on throughout the day, quickly moving to the next play, I found that trilogy to be very, very, very helpful in my own mindset, which then obviously is connected to my happiness and my fulfillment, my ability to manage stress and so forth.
Fantastic. So you have a new book that's coming out in 2022 called Sustain Your Game. Can you give us maybe a brief preview of what we can expect in that book?
Sure. So the whole goal of Raise Your Game was to provide folks with some strategies and some mindsets and some habits to allow them to reach optimum performance. Sustain Your Game is what do we need to do to sustain optimum performance? And we actually already talked about the three portions of the subtitle, which is high performance keys to managing stress, avoiding stagnation, and beating burnout. And those are three things that I think are at an all-time high as we're, a year and a half into a global pandemic. I'm a big believer that the vast majority of people walking the earth have felt stress to an before seen level. I think it's very easy for folks to put on the cruise control and just get very stagnant and plateau, whether that's in your marriage or that's in your work. And I know plenty of folks who have become increasingly more burnout in what they do. And that's not because of the pandemic. I think the pandemic has helped expose that, and in many instances kind of threw some lighter fluid on it. So this book, that whole goal is once you feel like you've reached the top of that mountain, how can we keep you there for long periods of time while you thoroughly enjoy the journey?
Fantastic. Well, certainly looking forward to that one coming out. So before I ask my final question to you, what challenge would you like to leave our audience with?
There's two, actually. And I'll look at this challenge almost like two different homework assignments. The one is actually something they can do. This is an exercise I do with a lot of the corporate groups I work with. I want you to take a piece of paper and I want you to draw a vertical line right down the middle. And on the left side, I want you to come up with a list of we'll just call them things, activities that fill your bucket, things that give you energy, that make you smile, things you enjoy doing, things that add value to your life. These could be things for your physical well-being, like taking a yoga class or jumping on your Peloton bike or going for a jog. These could be things for your mental well-being, like reading a book or listening to a podcast or watching a documentary. These can be things for your emotional well-being, like meditation or prayer or a conversation with a loved one. But come up with a list of the things that you simply love to do and they make you feel better. Then on the other side of that vertical line that you drew, I want you to etch out how you've been spending the bookends of your day, your morning and your evening routine. How do you normally spend the first 60 minutes after you wake up? And how do you normally spend the last 60 minutes before you go to bed? And I'm well aware that every day of the week is not identical, that if you work a traditional job, your Sunday and your Wednesday look differently. But I also know that human beings are creatures of habit, and we've grooved many behaviors that we've put on autopilot, which means I'm willing to bet for most of your listeners, what you do most Sunday mornings and what you do most Wednesday evenings is vaguely similar. You've created a pattern of behavior. And I kind of want you to etch that out. And then I want you to compare the two sides of the paper, your two sets of notes. And I want you to ask yourself, am I doing the things that I know I need to do to feel good and to show up as my best self? Am I making the time in the morning and evening to do the things that fill my bucket, that allow me to be my best self? And what you'll probably start to uncover if you do this with some honesty and humility is the term we said before, a performance gap. You'll start to know that I know when I do these things, I feel great, but I'm not really doing them. There is a gap between what I know and what I do. And I challenge everyone to close that gap, to start taking things off of list number one and start integrating that into your morning and evening routine. Even if they're just little small tweaks at first, you'll see your performance immediately start to skyrocket, but you'll also see your happiness and your fulfillment and your sense of inner peace start to improve as well, because you'll get tremendous satisfaction off of showing up as your best self in every single thing that you do.
Love that. I'm going to do that challenge myself. I know all of you out there are going to do the same. If you want to see better improvements in your life, if you want to elevate your game, raise your game, and sustain it, do the exercise. Let's start there and let's see what you come up with. That's awesome. So, Alan, I have all of your social links, etc. We're going to put all of that in the show notes. And here is my final question to you. So, what's one of the most valuable lessons that you've learned from a client that you didn't expect?
I mean, I have learned so many lessons. It's hard. I mean, almost everything I've shared with you, I've learned from those that I've been working with. I mean, certainly I had some of these nuggets implanted at me, when I was younger, but the vast majority of these things are things that I've learned. And that's one of the reasons I'm so thankful and so appreciative to do the work that I've been able to do, because I learn just as much from those I work with as I'd like to believe I'm teaching them. It's incredibly reciprocal. And this was even true when I was working mostly with high school age athletes in the basketball world. I would still learn things from them that were incredibly valuable. But if I have to pick one, I would say I had a client that I was working with kind of teach me about the way we can design our future in the present moment has to do with our decision making, and that the future in and of itself is completely hypothetical. I mean, if you think about it, we can never be in the future. All we can be in is in the present moment. And the future is really only a mental construct that's been created through language. I mean, anytime you think you've arrived in the future, well, you're not there. You're just in the present moment. It makes me laugh. Many years ago, I saw the best sign I've ever seen. It was at a bar, and it was at one of those neon signs, and it said free beer tomorrow. And I just thought that was hilarious. I mean, every time you show up, it's like, oh, I guess I can't get beer until tomorrow. And then you come back tomorrow. Oh, well, the future it's the exact same thing. You can never be in the future. All you can do is be in the present. However, the decisions that you make today heavily impact what the present moment will be in the future. And the filter that I use for myself, and this was something that I kind of co-created with a client, was I've gotten crystal clear on the man that I want to be 20 years from now. So I'm 45 years old at present. In 20 years from now, and please know, I'm aware that those 20 years are not promised and they're not guaranteed. There's nothing that says I'll be on this earth for 20 more years, but barring something unforeseen, let's just hypothetically say that I will be. Well, I want the 65-year-old Alan to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. I want the 65-year-old Alan to have a very deep and loving connection with his children, his family, and his friends. I want the 65-year-old Alan to be doing work he considers meaningful and in service of other people. So that's loosely the person that I want to be. So right now, in the present moment, every day, I try to make as many decisions as I can that are in alignment with becoming that person. From what I'm going to eat for lunch, is this in alignment with being physically fit when I'm 65? To every other decision, large and small, that's the filter I run it through. Will this take me closer to becoming that person, or will it take me further away? And I'm not denying my own humanity in the moment, or I'm not postponing happiness. Notice that I didn't say, the 65-year-old Alan will be happy, and right now I've got to grit my teeth no, I love my life right now. I've never been more happier and fulfilled and peaceful than I am at present. but I want to keep that going. And the way that I keep that going is by continually making good decisions. And I'm not looking for perfection. I'm much more interested in progress. In case any of your listeners are wondering, I'm not batting 1,000. Every decision I make is not in perfect alignment with the man I want to become, but the vast majority of them are. And I give myself some grace and compassion when I make decisions that aren't, and I learn from them, and I just try to do better the next time. And one of the tools I use in some way, shape, or form, I don't say this verbatim every single night because I'm not a robot, but on some level, when you're going to rest your head on your pillow at night before you go to bed, just ask yourself this question. Say, I just traded 24 hours of my life for the progress I made today. Am I happy with that trade? And if you're happy with that trade, I sincerely hope you get a very peaceful and restful night's sleep. If you're not happy with that trade, just move on to the next play, sleep well anyway, and make some better decisions the next day.
Boom. Just amazing. Beautifully said. Thank you. And thank you so much for showing up as your best self and sharing your experience and your knowledge and your way of telling powerful stories with lessons attached to them. I'm truly grateful, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I want to make a note of this because I think it's really important. I have a feeling with your post-production that this final cut, that the listeners aren't going to know that while we were recording this, Jay and I had several technical glitches. We had some internet issues. We had some Zoom issues. We did a couple of take twos. We had to start all of that. And I really want to commend you for how present and graceful and composed you were the entire time. I certainly tried to dance with you on that. But I want folks to know that in the recording of this, everything didn't go as planned for the first few minutes. But we were okay with that. We accepted the reality, and we both chose a response that allowed us to move forward. And I really enjoyed this conversation. I can't thank you enough for the opportunity. And I do think the final product is going to be something the listeners enjoy and hopefully benefit from. So thank you so much, Jay.
Well, absolutely. And likewise. And I appreciate your words. And for all of you, thank you so much for watching and listening. And please do us a favor. Take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review and a comment. We would love to know from you what resonated most in this episode. And to enjoy more episodes and to learn how Jay Shear Business Consulting can help build a solid foundation for your service-based business, all you have to do is visit jayshearbusinessconsulting.com. And until next time, keep learning and growing. Order a copy of Raise Your Game. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear Business Consultant.
Jay Shear Business Consulting.